she's staring at.
Mega Man 2, released in 1992 for the Game Boy, is the sequel to Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge, and yeah, this isn't very good. So the story goes, development of Mega Man 2 was outsourced to another company, Beox, who developed only one other Game Boy title called Taiyu no Yusha Fibered GB, and this resulted in a less than stellar follow-up to the first Game Boy title, which was a solid first effort for the handheld. The sequels would eventually be developed by the same folks who did Dr. Wily's Revenge, and would turn out way better, which makes this second game stick out even more. It's actually kind of funny in a big picture sort of way, considering Mega Man 2 on the Nintendo Entertainment System is considered to be one of the pinnacles of the series, while Mega Man 2 on Game Boy is more like the capstone. The setup is somewhat similar to the previous game. You start off on a stage select presenting you with 4 stages based on Mega Man 2. And when I say 4 stages based on Mega Man 2, I mean the levels are just derivatives of those NES levels, with some new segments to make them unique, like a water section in Woodman stage, or ladders in Metal Man stage. As per tradition, defeating a robot master nets you their weapon, but 3 of the bosses also holds a Rush accessory. Rush Coil, Rush Marine, and Rush Jet can be obtained by defeating Clash Man, yes, Clash Man, localization be damned, Metal Man, and Airman respectively, and these more or less function as they did in Mega Man 3, so Rush Jet can be flown around freely rather than constantly moving forward as would be the case in later games. Defeating all 4 bosses sends Mega Man to Wily Castle, where Wily sets a trap for Mega Man and sends you to another teleport chamber, which is where you'll encounter 4 bosses from Mega Man 3, as well as tackle their stages based on their NES counterparts. Oh, and unless you've played this stage countless times, you have no way of knowing which pod leads to which stage until you actually step in said pod, which they would dump in favor of a proper stage select screen in the sequels, but I digress. Once that wave of bosses is done, you'll head down to another chamber to face off against Quint, a future version of Mega Man who was captured and reprogrammed by Dr. Wily and sent back in time to face his younger self, and using his superior ability to... It's Guts Man. Dun-na. And then you have one more level to play before you face off against Dr. Wily in another one of his Wily machine contraptions. You beat him, you gain his master weapon, and then you use it to shoot down Dr. Wily and watch him crash and burn. So there you go, Dr. Wily's dead. That's the end of the Mega Man series. Kind of a sorry note to end it on, but fortunately that kept making more of them, so oh well. So Mega Man 2's gameplay is largely based on that of the third NES game. You can slide, you have rush adapters and energy tanks. The back end of the game adds an additional hurdle in that clearing stages does not restore all your weapon energy, keeping in line with the NES Wily Castle stages, where it's all about endurance and resource management. Although given that you get a password after clearing each stage, this is somewhat rendered moot if approached that way since you start with a clean bill of health. The master weapons gained from enemies operate as they did in the NES originals, in some cases a tad better, like a top spin that, to this game's credit, only uses 1 point of energy when you hit an enemy with it. It's not a go-to by any means, but it's more so than the weapon you get from defeating Quint, the jackhammer-looking thing Sakugarn. Yes, it lets you jump higher and you could kill minor enemies with it, and supposedly you could cross-spike floors safely, but... not really. But trying to hit stronger foes with it will also damage you in the process, and while the game expects you to use this in the final battle with Wily, you're just better off pelting it with lemons and keeping an E-tank or 2 in your back pocket just in case. Sakugarn demonstrates a lack of polish in regards to the overall gameplay and feel of Mega Man 2. With odd quirks and behaviors such as taking a hit on a ladder and still being able to climb upwards, collision detection not quite being as smooth as usual, or even the lack of pause during energy refills. Usually gameplay is interrupted while energy is being replenished, and that doesn't happen here. giving way to a trick that lets you pause in the middle of a refill and switch weapons, thus making one capsule fill 2 weapons, possibly more if you're crafty enough. And while Control is generally responsive, Mega Man also has a certain looseness or floatiness to his movement. Something about it feels almost but not quite right. Not enough that it ruins the game entirely, but enough to make the whole thing feel inauthentic or bootleg. Level design is more or less mimicking the NES levels with some deviations here and there, but generally come across as easier than the previous game. Add in some oddball quirks and rough patches, and you have perhaps one of the easiest games in the series, which might sound appealing to newcomers who might find this series to be a bit overwhelming. Yes, some people consider classic Mega Man hard as nails, and I wouldn't really blame them. But Mega Man 2 is not what I would call a good entry point. Not to say that it's an entirely bad game, it's mostly playable and functional enough. Control is responsive despite Mega Man's looser feel. Stuff generally works as it's supposed to. It's not quite as good as the others, and that makes it stand out for not so good reasons. Mega Man 2 certainly looks the part if nothing else. There's obviously more visual variety here than in the previous game as far as level backdrops are concerned. The overall sprite work is uneven. Mega Man looks fine save for his slide, which looks awkwardly compressed, and most of the enemies have a rough, uneven quality to them. Either they're lesser copies of the NES sprites, or redrawn entirely for the sake of the smaller Game Boy screen, and look particularly shoddy. It'd be one thing if this were the first Game Boy entry, but it's not. It's the second entry, and at times it looks worse than its predecessor, which does not inspire much confidence. Of course, whenever anyone discusses Mega Man 2 on Game Boy, one inevitably brings up the notoriously god-awful music. The screechy, high-pitched, ear-grating noise that somehow got approved with an official Nintendo seal of quality. By the way, this is the follow-up to Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge, a game released a year earlier and with far superior musical prowess. Surprisingly, Mega Man 2 opts for a wholly original soundtrack rather than try to adapt any of the NES tracks, and hidden under the cacophony of Ear Violation Central lies a pretty decent set of tunes, and this soundtrack has been subject to a number of quality remixes over the years, notably a remix album from Rush Jet 1 that's tremendous, and also a recent update to the fan-made Mega Man Maker added its own take on the tunes that are also quite nice. What I'm saying is that Mega Man 2 has good music under better circumstances, but in its original format, nah. As far as the sound effects go, meh. That's all I got. Disregarding any third-party PC spin-offs, mobile ports, or anything of the sort, Mega Man 2 on Game Boy is the low point of classic Mega Man, which sounds a bit overly dramatic because by and large the game isn't horrifically bad. It's still playable, it still functions like Mega Man for the most part, and it's not completely broken, but the lack of polish in gameplay, the rough-looking visuals, and ear-bleeding audio, among other things, contribute to a Mega Man game that not only falls below the standards of typical Mega Man fare, but is actually a lesser product compared to its predecessor, which had fewer levels and fewer things in general, but did a far better job of bringing Mega Man to the portable front. Ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, there are far worse Mega Man titles, and Mega Man 2 plays functionally enough that it narrowly avoids the trash heap, but compared to its mainline and even sub-series portable brethren, this is fairly substandard, even subpar stuff. But on the bright side, we're past the low point of the series and moving on to bigger and better things, and it starts with Mega Man 3 for next time. Good night.